Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Floyd Richmond. Today we're going to take a look at GarageBand on the iPad. GarageBand on the iPad is a inexpensive purchase on the iTunes music store, and I highly recommend it. I'm going to go ahead and click on GarageBand. Will open up to different locations depending on the last thing that you were doing in GarageBand itself. You notice here that maybe I was in the file navigation area of GarageBand last time, so that's where it brought me at this point in time. Down at the bottom of the screen you will notice that there's a Recents button. If I tap on that, it shows me the songs I was working on recently. There's a Browse button. If I tap on that, it shows me the songs that I have saved on my iPad or in various locations. If you look at the locations on the left, you see that you can save to the iCloud drive, the Dropbox files, OneDrive from Microsoft, the Google Drive, and you can also save songs directly on your iPad. You can also favorite your songs so that you can find them quickly. Again, especially if you are like me and have lots and lots of songs on your iPad. If you've only been using your GarageBand for a short time, then it's likely that you don't have a long list of songs on your iPad. You can also use the tags feature to set different colors for each of the files: red, orange, yellow, and green, depending on their category or priority. You'll notice that there are plus buttons on the screen so that you can create new GarageBand documents, and I'm going to go ahead and just type the plus button at the upper right hand corner of the screen. And the first thing I'd like to do is give you a tour of some of the touch instruments that are found on GarageBand. When you run GarageBand, it says, oh, you need to create a track so you can start recording. And I'll just scroll quickly through here and you'll see the various kinds of tracks that can be recorded, and wonderful instruments and wonderful connections to external instruments and those types of things. But let's start with the keyboard. The first keyboard I'd like to show you is the Smart Keyboard. I'm going to tap on the Smart Piano button in that particular screen, and GarageBand is now loading a Smart Piano for me. This is a wonderful touch instrument that you can play in GarageBand very easily. For example, I can just touch the C chord, and it should play the C chord. Since I didn't hear that sound, excuse me 1 second here while I unplug and replug my speakers. One of the things that, and also I'm going to check my volume control as well to see if it's turned up. One of the things that GarageBand does is it may sometimes switch audio interfaces, but if you unplug and replug your speakers or your headphones, then it will automatically use the ones that were last plugged in. Hopefully you don't have to do that too often, but that is something that occasionally happens. Sorry, I'm tapping the C chord now in the center of the screen, and the G chord, and the F chord, and C chord. And so I can actually play patterns right there. Okay, stumbling a little bit as I'm striking that, but I'm going to try it again. Alright, once again, I think my touch screen is doing a little bit of misfiring on that, multiple fires with a single touch or something like that. So you do have to have a healthy touch screen in order to play this, but I'll just go ahead and strike the C again. Yep. Yeah, it's firing to both the C chord that I strike and then slightly to the right of that to hit the F chord. Right? Yep, here's my F chord. Here's my G chord, and you'll notice little strings that are strung across these notes as I drag from the bottom to the top. You get some wonderful sounds that happen there, so I can just strum the whole thing. Yeah, and so you could actually be playing accompaniment patterns that are nothing but that. But the good news is the smart instruments are much smarter than that. For example, there's an arpeggiator in here. I'm going to turn this arpeggiator on. It's this button on the upper right hand corner. If I switch that over into run mode, I can set the parameters for the arpeggiator. And what I'm doing here is just saying, hey, why don't you arpeggiate all the notes of, let's say, a C chord, if I press that, using 16th notes over a range of 2 octaves in the order of notes played. And I'm just going to go ahead and press the C chord here, and you'll hear arpeggios. And there's a little bit of space between the releases and restrikes of that, but if you practice this a little bit, you can actually have it go in immediately from one chord to the next. And it's a wonderful manner of creating some fantastic automatic accompaniments there. Okay, in addition to the arpeggiator, which I'm going to turn off now, I'll just turn that off from the run to the don't run mode there. There's an autoplay mode, and I can put this on number 1 here, press the C chord. 2, 2, 3, 4, change F, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, change G. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, change C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, off C. Yep. So I just turn that off by striking that. I can even, yep. I can even turn on just the bass notes for automatic playback as well, or I can turn on the treble notes for automatic playback. And I can stack the chords against each other like a C treble over a G bass, which is kind of an interesting sound. Bitonality perhaps, but perhaps a little bit more just like the C over the G chord, or the G over the F chord, or something like that. Okay, G over an F bass note. I'm going to switch it over to autoplay 2, and I'm going to press the C chord again. Okay, and so as I change the various chords, it plays with various patterns. Obviously, you need to work this out so that it is somewhat, but you do have the option for some very nice pattern generation there. There are 4 accompaniment patterns in that particular song. You've seen 1 and 2. Here's number 3 now. Here's number 4. Back down to number 2. Back down to number 1. And turn it off. Yep, there we go. So those accompaniment patterns can be added to any song in GarageBand that you wish. I'm going to hit the rewind button up at the top of the screen, put it on auto accompaniment 1, and hit the record button and C. And there you have it. I recorded a pattern C, F, C, G, and that pattern will repeat over and over, and you can record different songs into it. Okay, so in addition to the grand piano patterns, of which there are 4, there's also a classical grand that has 4 additional auto accompaniments. You can also put it on an electric piano that has 4 additional audio accompaniments. And in addition to the automatic accompaniments that happen there, there are also controls for the sound of the instrument, so you can turn up or down the tremolo, or up or down the chorus. You have various controls that show up here based on the instrument that you have selected. I'm going to go ahead and click on electric piano there again, and you will see that there are other things such as rock organs. Here's a classic rock organ. Here's the heavy metal organ, the smooth clavier, and so you have a great collection of keyboard instruments that you can use here. In addition to the keyboards, you also have the synth classics, you have the synth basses, you have the synth leads, and you have the synth pads, and you also have sound effects as well. So there are 4 accompaniment patterns for every single instrument on each one of these. If you choose any one of them, you will find various accompanying patterns. This is the auto phase effects, and I'll put it on auto 1 and just play a C chord. There's no telling what this is going to sound like. And there you have it. It's basically, that is kind of an electronic sound, and so you would expect that the auto accompaniment for the electronic sounds, sound effects in particular, would be a little bit unusual. You find the more musical things, I believe, in the instruments that are more traditional types of instruments, such as the classical grand, the electric piano, and so on. Okay, that's a quick tour of the smart keyboards. I'm going to go ahead and give you some additional tours of your instruments here. There in the keyboard, there's a traditional keyboard as well, so that was being played a lot automatically. This is switching over now to playing the keyboard manually. So I can come here and just play chords, and I can record those as a part of my song. Hit the rewind button and just hit the play button. Always helps if you actually do line your harmonies up a little bit better than what I did in that particular example. I'm not looking at music or remembering exactly what I played previously, so you'll get some interesting sounds in there. But still, these have been combined and recorded together. If I go down to the track mode, I just click the track button down there. It shows me my rich synthesizer, which is a manual keyboard, and my grand piano, which is playing a auto accompaniment track. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take you back to the synthesizer, the traditional synthesizer, just to show you a few other things here. This has what we would call a glissando mode. So if you run your fingers across the strings, it actually plays the same thing as just the glissando would on your keyboard. It also has a scroll mode. If I turn it on scroll mode, I can move the keyboard up, put it back on glissando mode here, and I can play patterns in a different octave. Okay, and if you need more notes on the keyboard at once, there's a little keyboard button here, and I can choose, hey, give me 2 sets of keyboards here, and now I've got a upper set of keyboards and a lower set of keyboards here. And if I don't need the same octave on each of those, I believe I can scroll. Okay, it might be a little harder. I can scroll one. Yep, I can scroll one of them to a different octave there. Okay, so a lot of different capabilities found there. So I'm going to touch on that keyboard button again, take it back to the 1-octave keyboard, and you'll also notice that as I touch on that keyboard that you have the full size 1 octave, 1.5 octaves, or you can go to a slightly different size keyboard. This will give you 2 octaves, give or take a little bit. Or you can click on that keyboard size one more time and go up to the next one, which is perhaps even a wider range, maybe 2.5 octaves or so. Notice that the notes actually do get a lot smaller once you get into that size, and so it's a lot harder to play with big fingers like mine. Children with small fingers might find it easier to play those kind of things. You can also attach an external MIDI keyboard to this through the Lightning port. Any MIDI keyboard that uses the universal MIDI drivers from Macintosh and Windows will be able to plug into the iPad and immediately begin working. You have to plug it into the USB port of the camera connection kit, which you plug into the Lightning port of the iPad, and that works wonderfully. Okay, I'm going to go back up to my touch instruments here, and we'll have a look at one other keyboard instrument. This is going to be the sampler. I'm just going to go ahead and press the sample button, and notice here it opens up yet another keyboard here, and it says point your iPad towards the sound you want to record, then tap start. After you stop recording, you can instantly play the sound on the sampler keyboard. All right, the iPad is pointed toward me. I'm going to hit the start button and sing a note. Okay, and then I hit the stop button. And you know what? I don't particularly like that sample, so I'm going to back up again. Delete that one. Hit a new sample button. Try it again. Hit the stop button. Notice at the end of that I have a little bit of extra sound. I can drag the right hand side of this so that it actually cuts out just about the sound gets to 0, and I think that's probably the best way to do that. I'm going to now play a C on the keypad. It may not be in the right octave, we'll see. Yeah, not too bad. I can actually sing harmony with myself now. Yeah, and this is automatically generated by the iPad based off of that sample that I entered into the computer. If you want to use some of the samples that come built with GarageBand, just click on the My Samples button, and you'll find things in here like a kids giggling. Let's hear that. Or kids cheering. Okay. These are not necessarily in the right octave, so you may have to go over into scroll mode here, and then press the C in a higher octave. So that actually does sound more like kids cheering in the proper octave there. In addition to that, I should mention to you one other thing, and that is that you can bring external sounds into the sampler to be used as well. I'm going to hit the import button here in the upper right hand corner, and it brings up a screen, and it says, would you like to use some of the Apple loops as a sound? And so you could actually trigger one of these Apple loops just every time you press a C. It could start that particular pattern, and if you want to use those, that's fantastic. There's a tab up at the top that's called Audio Files. I find that particularly useful because iTunes and GarageBand for the iPad have a file sharing option where you can put your own sounds and add sounds that are not found in GarageBand. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom of my audio files to find some sounds that I have added to GarageBand that are not found there. For example, here is a suspended cymbal medium roll. And that particular sound is not found in GarageBand. And if I would like to add that to a GarageBand song that I'm working on, I just press that little download it button, and it puts it into my GarageBand sampler. And now every time I press a C, I'm not sure this is in the right octave. Yep, wrong octave. Let's scroll this up to the appropriate C here. All right. May still not be the same exact octave, but at any rate, I can choose one that I like. Okay. Yeah, very good. So I can import those sounds from my other recording sources. You can bring sounds into GarageBand that are not automatically a part of that project. So the sampler is a pretty cool keyboard instrument as well. So we've seen now 3 different keyboards: the smart keyboard, the manual play-it-in keyboard, and the sampler keyboard. Let's take a look at some of the other instruments. Here is a drum track that you can create in GarageBand. I'm going to just go ahead and load the bottom left one there, which is the drum pattern machine. Before I start doing anything with this particular pattern, I'd like to go ahead and mute some of these other tracks. So in order to do that, I swipe left on the small track button there on that little gray tab in the center. I turn on the mute button for those piano sounds that I don't particularly want to hear. And I'll go back up to my instrument tab at the upper right hand corner, and it brings me back to my drum machine. Now the drum machines have about 5 or 6 different machines you can use. There is a classic drum machine, a classic studio kit, a hip-hop drum machine, a house drum machine, a live rock kit, and a vintage kit. It's currently set to hip-hop, and we'll just go ahead and use that for demo. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to roll the dice, and it's going to randomly choose some instruments to play a hip-hop pattern. Here goes. I'll hit the power button to turn that off so we can talk about it just a minute. So basically what it did was it selected instruments from the right hand side, the kick drum, the snare drum, and the hi-hat, and it put them into this field to be played. Where they're placed in the field actually has a lot of meaning. So if I want the bass drum to be very loud, I can drag it higher. If I want it to be softer, I can drag it lower. The higher you put it, the louder it is. The lower you put it, the softer it is. Now, up and down would be loud and soft, and left and right would be simple and complex. So you hear the hi-hat is doing some pretty complex patterns there. If I'd like the hi-hat to take it a little bit easier and play some very simple patterns, I can drag it left. Let's listen. And I can do the same thing with the other instruments. Bass drum a little bit softer. Yep. Bass drum a little bit more fancy. Snare drum a little bit more fancy. Hi-hat a little bit more. Hi-hat a little louder. Yeah. Put them all fancy as they can go. And just get your balance just right. So you can create some pretty fancy accompaniments on GarageBand using just the generator that's found here. You are not limited to the hip-hop drum patterns. Once again, if I click on this, and let's just go over to the vintage kit, and I'm just going to roll the dice a couple of times here. If I'd like to add claves, I can just drag those in. If I really don't want tambourine, I can just drag it out. Can make the claves more complex, the bass drum softer, the hi-hat louder, the snare drum softer, the claves louder. Okay, and you can experiment with that to your heart's content. If I want a crash cymbal in here, I can put that in every now and then. If I want some toms in here, and if I want to try those if I want to try other patterns, I can go to the Classic Studio Kit, roll the dice, and see what I get here. Congas. In fact, I like those congas so much. I could easily just see this being my drum. I could easily see this just being my drum pattern for some songs that I would do. Or that might be a great way to start a song, is just with those congas. Want to add those to my song? Record. Okay, and now those congas have been added to my song. Go back down to my track measure, and notice that it only added them for the duration that I recorded them. Let's say I did turn that autoplay piano back on and added these congas. This may not give me the desired impact, but let's see what we get. Okay, it's not too bad. Obviously, I need more congas. The good news is, and you can split these up as you want to, so I'm going to just tap on that track, tap twice to get my split button. I'm going to drag this scissor down across that. I'm going to tap twice to delete that particular one. I'm going to click on this and tap it twice to get the loop button. Tell it to loop for the duration of this verse or this section, and go ahead and hit play. Okay, so that's actually working pretty nicely. I'm pleased with the drum effects that I get in that particular pattern. I'm going to click on the instrument button to go back to that pattern again. I think we've pretty much seen everything we need to see in this particular area. I'm going to go back to the instrument area, and so we've seen the drums, and we've seen the smart drums, and we're going to look now at the auto drums, acoustic drums, sorry. So I tapped on the acoustic drums, and here I can come in and record my own patterns. So let's say I practice this just a little bit. Okay, I can actually record those into Okay, I can record those into my song as I would wish as well. I can do crash cymbals, ride cymbals, and I'm going to click the help button up here in the upper right hand corner, and you will see that it shows you where to touch the various instruments to get the different sounds that that instrument is capable of. So closed hi-hat. You can alternate closed and open like that. And pedal hi-hat, or closed and pedal. Crash cymbal. Okay, two fingers plays crash only. Okay. Yep, supposedly. Yeah, there we go. High toms and low tom, mid toms. Low tom, bass, snare and rim shot, side stick, ride cymbal, ride bell. Okay, so any of those could be combined into your composition here. I'm going to go back down to my tracks just a minute. You remember I have congas in here, and I don't particularly want to hear the congas for that, so I'm just going to just go back into my other drummer here and go back up to my instrument track and record just a little bit of this in here. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and I think that some of these tracks actually have features where you can layer things on top of them, but in case they do not, you can always create another set of the same instruments here, and I can go back and rewind that. It should have both of those drums in there. Now I'm going to add a ride cymbal on eighth notes here. And then I try to do a little bit of a tenor drum thing in there as well, as you noticed. And so, yeah, after every 4 bars or so, you need to do something a little bit different to kind of mark the phrases. So you can build your songs quite nicely in that particular manner. I accidentally took that back down to the My Songs area, but I'd like to take you back and show you more virtual instruments here if I could. There is one other drummer that is really cool. Well, actually 2 more that are really cool. One more in this particular area that you need to see. I'm going to click on the one that's called the Beat Sequencer, and I'm pull that up. And this is a really cool interface for building sounds. You'll notice that I've got beat 1E and 2E and 3E and so I've got the bass drum on beats 1, 2, 3, 4. Put the snare drum on the end. Maybe I'll put my snare like this. And I'll put some 16th notes on a hi-hat here. Put a little tenor drum on this. Put some sticks in here every now and then. And a hand clap once in a while will be kind of fun. Yeah, that hand clap is a little bit confusing there, so put it right there. Now that may be slightly too predictable. Alright, when I finally get this to the level where I really want it, then I will rewind, press the record button. And now that's been recorded into my song. If I go down to my track view, I can actually see that it has been added as well. And I can open this track up just a little bit, adjust how loud or soft this is. If that was too loud, I can pull it down a little bit. If this was too loud, I can pull it down. I muted these tracks apparently because I didn't particularly want them or they were interfering with my demo. So I'm just going to delete those by double tapping them and hitting the delete key there. All right, so rewind and press play again. So yeah, it's a excellent way of building your composition. A lot of this is done with automatically generated smart instruments, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go back up to my instruments now and take you through a little bit more tour. Now you saw the vocal audio recording tracks. Let me just go ahead and show you this as well. So if you plug in a guitar, either using an iRig or a audio interface, then you can use the various amplifiers that are found in GarageBand. So here's one called a clean combo. I don't have an input going into this currently, but let me just go ahead and show you that you can change the tremolo, the depth, the speed, the presence, the master, the output, the bass, the mids, the treble, the gain, and that's for the clean combo amp. If you want to use a different amp, you just choose up here and you can select any one of these other amps. Here's one called American Tremolo, and here's one called Brit Pop, and these are all clean amps, I believe. I notice on the left hand side it says, hey, here's some crunchy sounds, some amplifiers that have been designed. Bell Bottom Rock has got to be 70s crunch guitar, so if I had a guitar running through this amplifier, you would hear distortion, usually by overloading the amplifier slightly, and that's a pretty cool sound as well. You can experiment with that. Here's one called Distorted, and so these actually take to extreme overload of the amp signal. Clipping is used as a part of the musical process or the musical timbre. And so you can choose things like Iron Fuzz and Punk Rock and Seattle Sound. The next one up here is called Processed, and so these would have various effects applied to them: shimmer, delay, funk, the strobe. These kind of names kind of tell you the type of sound that you're probably going to get by experimenting or running a guitar through those. Okay, I'm going to not save anything in that, since, well, I could record my voice into this and let you hear a distorted voice, but I'm just going to let you imagine that. Okay, I'm going to go back up to the instrument area, and here's one called Distorted, and if I click on that, then two things happen in my guitar. I have both the amp, but I also have the pedal section as well, and this has various pedals added to the guitar. This is literally thousands of dollars worth of pedals. Your guitarist could not afford all of the pedals that are found in here, and you can add multiple pedals to your GarageBand. You can replace the ones that are there. Here's one called High Drive. Here's one called Fuzz. You'll notice that almost every one that loads has buttons on it that you can turn it. So here's one called Chorus. The names once again kind of tell you what it is that they do. Here's one called Robo Flanger. A flanger is kind of a processed sound effect using some phasing. The Vibe, that would obviously have vibrato added to it. Here's one called Auto Funk. And so you can once again twist the buttons, turn on and off the various things that are found on these pedals, and echo. So this would be a fairly simple clean sound. You would typically run this and you would get repeats of the signals run through there. Here's one called Squash. That's a form of compression and distortion. So yeah, run your guitar sounds through this as you record them. Twist these buttons and see what kind of things change. You can actually change these settings after you do the recording, so if you found that you had a little too much or a little too little of some timbre adjustment that was happening in the pedals, you can come back in and change them after the recording has done. Okay, the amplifiers are pretty cool. I think that they definitely are worth your time and attention. The audio recording has two different settings, vocal and instrumental, and this is a very simple audio track. Basically, when you record in here, you just hit the rewind button, you hit the record button, and you start singing. Okay, and then whatever you recorded was actually, or sang, was recorded into your particular effect. If you go back into the instrument track for settings there, you'll notice that you can change things such as how much reverb is applied to that track. Reverb is a setting that is typically highly overused, But I do have to say this, it is overused for good reason, and that is because there's nothing that makes your voice sound better than reverb. You can also, in this particular panel, set the input of your microphone to make sure it's not clipping. You can, if you have headphones turned on and are not recording into the space where you are singing like I am, so you can hear everything I'm doing, then you can adjust the level of sound that is sent to your headphones. Currently, monitoring is turned off and should always be off if you're recording with your speakers playing. Normally, except for demonstrations, you would never record with your speakers playing. You would always plug your headphones in instead, and you would turn your monitor on. Okay, everybody understands that process, I'm sure. I'm going to go back up to my tracks here, and I'll just go ahead and tell you that there are smart strings that are very cool. There are also notes that you can play on the string instruments, and you can limit the notes that you play on the strings to the scales as well. The bass is done exactly the same. There's a smart bass with auto patterns that play based on the chords that you tell it. There are notes where you can just play literally with the effects of the bass, doing the glissandos and the string stretches and things like that that would be normal in playing the bass. And there's also a scale section, so you can limit your notes to just a key that you're in. You can also limit it to pentatonic and chromatic and other scales as well. The guitar, smart guitar, is pretty clever, so I do have to just take you a quick detour and show you the smart guitar here. So the smart guitar has really great chords here, and if you just bring it up and don't turn on autoplay, just press the C chord at the top, it gives you a really nice little strum. Those are great samples, and they sound fantastic just by strumming the chords, and that's without even turning on any auto accompaniment whatsoever. I'm just tapping on the name of the chord. If you want to play some finger picking, you can actually pluck these strings down here on the fretboard. So gorgeous sounds possible on this instrument, on the smart instrument, just right here on the immediate fingerboard with no autoplay whatsoever. You just tap the notes and it works wonderfully. There is a button up here called autoplay, and if I turn it on autoplay 1 and press the C chord, F chord, G chord, A minor chord, autoplay 2, C chord, autoplay 3, autoplay 4, a wide variety of picking patterns for the acoustic guitar. Hey, you play some of the guitar besides the acoustic guitar, no problem. You can go to the classic clean and find fantastic autoplay sounds on each of those, and notice that it even includes some of the distortion pedals and echo pedals, but this is clean, so it shouldn't be a lot of distortion here. 2, 3, 4. Yep, so there's some pretty good sounds in there. Okay, let's say you are kind of a distorted person, and you like the hard rock sound, so let's let that load here. And we'll hear some autoplay on each of those as well. I'll put it on number 1 first here. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Okay, so there's quite a lot of interesting sounds that are happening there. Notice on these guitars there's a button that says chords, and then also there's a button that says notes, so you can switch over into note mode right here. You need to kind of learn your patterns so that you know where they are, but there's a scale button over here, so you can say, hey, just only let me have major notes on the scale. And so now you can only play the major notes. You notice these little light colored panels? That's Do. So you can always find Do by jumping to the light paneled notes, the name of the key. If it's in the key of C, that's a C. Okay, yeah, pretty clever. I'm going to take this off the scales and just put it back on to let me play anything that I want. Oh, you can also stretch strings. And obviously you can only stretch them so far, but you can do some kind of expressive playing that way. And that takes a little bit of practice, just like it would on a real guitar, but it's a lot easier to stretch these strings than it is to stretch the strings of a real guitar. That's actually pretty clever. I just have to say I'm highly impressed with the features that GarageBand's auto guitar permits. All right, I'm going to go back up to our touchscreen instruments and just show you a few more of these if I could. If you have installed the world instruments on your GarageBand, then you also have some lutes like the Chinese pipa, some folk instruments like the two-string violin, the Chinese erhu. You also have this drummer track, which is very similar to the drummer track that is found in the full version of GarageBand for the Macintosh and also for Logic. Up here, you can choose the complexity that when you select this drummer, it automatically creates a drum track for you for the duration of the song. If you have different sections of your song, like your verse and chorus and that type of thing, then it'll create a different pattern for each section of your song. This is Kyle, the drummer, and I'm clicking on Kyle here, and when I do that, it says, hey, you can have Logan play. Logan plays like this, and it's different than Kyle. You can have Magnus play, and he plays like this. You can have Leah play, and Jasper and Maurice and Dez and Darcy and Mason, and back to Kyle again. So you've got your assorted drummers who will play for you. Let's go ahead and put Logan in here. Let's see, I'll read about him. Inspired by legendary drum heroes of the past, Logan plays sparse, hard-hitting rock beats and fills on a retro-sounding kit. Okay, so let's go ahead and take Logan. We'll go ahead and select him. And so Logan's drum pattern has been added to this, and I'm going to rewind and play a little bit of Logan's pattern here. Okay, so that we don't have all of the conflicting things, I'm going to go back down to the track, and I'm going to mute all of these tracks except the drummer so you can hear what's going on just only with this drummer in particular. Okay, click on my instrument button again. Should take me back up to Logan here. I'm going to rewind that and press play again. Obviously I didn't get everything muted, so I'm going to try that one more time here. I go back down to my tracks button, and I'm going to tap on the mute button for every one of the tracks. Oh, I see what I did. I hit the solo button for all the tracks. Let's hit the mute button for all the tracks this time. And Logan is soloed. He doesn't need to be soloed. He's automatically on. All right, here we go. All right, let's rewind here. Now, notice that the hand clap is kind of set to like the minimum level there. If I want more hand clap, I can turn that up a little bit here. If I don't want any hand clap at all, but would rather have maracas, I can turn that on. More maracas, even more. if I would like to have not hi-hats but tenors, if I want less tenors, I can put it over there. If I want more tenors or more toms, I can put it over here. If I want more snare, busier snare, I can do that. If I want more fills, I can turn them up here. Okay, and if this were a jazz track, which obviously Logan is not a jazz drummer, then I could turn on the swing over here and set it to the kind of swing that I would like. Yes, there's just there's something inherently wrong about making a rock drummer play with swing. It just doesn't work as well as you might like it to. So try to find a different drummer than Logan to play your swing patterns is my suggestion. If typically I have found, although I don't know this works on GarageBand for the iPad, it does work on GarageBand for the desktop. If you split these fields like this, then what typically happens is that there is then usually added a little fill just to that exact point right there. So let's see if that split actually worked. No, I'm not sure the split worked like I wanted it to. Yeah, it did split. Yes. Okay, I got a little tatted down right there for a fill. I'm not sure that's exactly what I was expecting, but I do expect typically a little fill to happen anytime that I do a split like that. I'm not sure if that fill came before or after the time that I wanted it. I really wanted it before. Let's hear. Okay, it did. He did a very short da-da-dum, just a little half a beat kind of a fill. That worked out pretty nicely. So if you split your material, you will typically find that most of the drummers will try to add an additional fill at that point in time. All right, I'm going to go back up to the instruments here and just let you see some of the others here. That's so you saw two different kinds of drummers. I'm going to back up here to this drum track. Yep, and so here we've got the smart drums that play with the hip hop and the vintage kit. You've got your manual drums, you've got your beat programmer, and then you also have the auto drummers where you can just say, hey, let Logan or Kyle or Darcy or Maurice or whomever play, and they play with the styles that are characteristic of their own playing. Okay, this next area of demonstration requires it's a little bit advanced, but I think that it would be something that would be easy to understand. You can actually use what we call inter-application communication with GarageBand, and this means that other applications, other apps on your iPad could actually play into GarageBand. I'll just give you an example. I have a Korg M1 synthesizer installed on my iPad. I could set up a track that listens to everything that I play on the Korg M1 and records it into my GarageBand songs. This is a lot easier than hooking it up externally. I could just as easily run the output of this Korg M1 on the iPad back into an audio interface and back into the input and run the input into Garage. Well, it just gets way too complicated. So that you do not have to think about things like that, Apple has created inter-application communication, and it lets two apps installed on the same iPad communicate at the same time. Now, there are two different kinds of things that could communicate with one another. You could have instruments communicate with one another, and you can have effect units communicate with one another. And so I'm going to just go ahead and hit the external button. This will create a track. It says that it provides a convenient way for third-party instrument apps to be played and recorded in GarageBand. Do you want to browse a collection of compatible audio unit extensions available on the App Store? Well, you could do that, but I know I already have some compatible things on my computer, so I'm just going to click the audio unit extensions button down at the okay, appears not to let me do that. I'm going to try the InterApp audio button down there and see if it'll take me in there. Okay, yeah, good. So here are a bunch of instruments that are already available on my iPad. Okay, I can use other DAWs as inputs. I can use other instruments as inputs. Here's that Korg M1 I was telling you about. I could choose that, and anything I play on that Korg M1 would be recorded in to GarageBand. There's also a Moog synthesizer on here called the Moog, and you can see that on the screen here. It's got this little green-black icon with the cubes, stretched cubes. Looks like it's stretched over a sphere. At any rate, I can choose that, and anything I would play on those devices would be recorded into the tracks in GarageBand. I think what I would like to do instead of recording an instrument is to show you the other thing that InterApp Communication supports, which is effects. I'm clicking on the effects button here. And so these are the various effects that I have available on my iPad, applications that support effects. I purchased this AUFX application, and just for demonstration, mostly for things like this. And so okay. Okay, so the reason you were hearing feedback right then was because the monitoring was off. It was probably assuming that I was going to be attempting to do this with my headphones plugged in. I turned the monitor off, and so that's what you... well, okay. You should normally have your monitor on and your headphones plugged in. But for doing demonstrations, you should turn your monitor off so you don't get feedback like we were having right then. Okay, so at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell that like a clean audio recording. I've set that up, and you will notice that up here in this little plugin setting right here, it's communicating with my inter-application material. Now let's see what this thing is going to do to the sound. When I click on it, it actually takes me to this application. This application shows me that it has a dry wet mix up at the top, has an output gain, has a coarse setting, a tempo sync, a fine tune, a feedback setting, a stereo detune, a ping pong, a high cut, low cut filters. It has a tape noise filter, a warble rate, which will create some vibrato for me, and warble amount, which would also create some warble for me. Now I have not tinkered with any of these sounds. I just basically used the same settings that were found there before. Down at the bottom I actually have a record button and a GarageBand icon. If I hit the record button, I should actually start singing into this, and it should record me directly into that GarageBand track with these effects applied. Okay, I turned off record and turned off play, and so now I can switch back over to GarageBand and hope for the best. And when I say hope for the best, what I hope is when I go down to my track view, you will find that it actually recorded me. Yes, it did. Okay, it also recorded those drums because they were playing out loud in the space as well. But it should have recorded us with those audio effects, including the warble. Now let's see if we can hear them. And you can hear the effects that were applied to that, and so that did do what we expected it to do. The external effects are pretty cool. If you have instruments that are running in an app on an iPad, such as a Korg M1, an Moog synthesizer, a Roland, or a Yamaha keyboard, that is a virtual instrument that's installed on your keyboard as well. I'm just going to go ahead and summarize the sound library and say that it also permits you to download free instruments, sounds, and loops beyond those that are found in GarageBand. and so I highly recommend exploring that particular area as well. There's one last area of GarageBand I would like to show you. I'm not really showing a lot of the production techniques in GarageBand because I'm assuming that anybody who comes to GarageBand has a pretty good understanding of how to do those things. But here's a unique feature of Garage. The touch instruments and the live instruments are unique features of GarageBand that you wouldn't necessarily find in other DAWs. I do have to say this though, this particular feature is very similar to a feature that is found in Ableton Live. In Ableton Live they call it Session View. That has been implemented very nicely in GarageBand for several different styles of music. We have a type of music called EDM, electronic dance music. We have a type called hip hop, dubstep, R&B, house, chill, rock, electro funk, Beatmaster, Chinese traditional, and Chinese modern. And I'm just going to go into the EDM section and just give you a quick tour of this. So basically what happens here is a set of similarly styled building blocks have been loaded into the computer. If I press any one of them, the one starts to play. Notice it's got a little clock that shows you when the next one should come in. If I want to change that one for another one, as long as I tap it before it gets around to its full cycle, it will add or replace the other instruments. I do this in rows, so let's say I want this one to come in next, and if I want this one to come in next, and I can press it again to get it to turn off as well. Now, these individual instruments can be combined in some very interesting ways. Like if I turn this one on here and this one, notice they come on at the right time in the cycle. And I can actually turn them all off by clicking on one of the buttons on the far right hand side. The most far right one just turns them all off immediately. The next to the far right button actually turns off with that little ding kind of sound, which is a very cool way to do this. Notice the row of buttons at the very bottom of the screen. These are actually designed to be played as sections of a song. So if I press the bottom one, it turns on all of these. Yeah, and so I just played the A section and then the B section, and then I hit the let's end it with a type of a sound, and that was a pretty cool type of thing. You can build entire songs, great length songs, just going back and forth. Here's my A section, B section. Let's call this the C section or the chorus. Next section, building section. Kind of a bridge break. And so you can compose your songs just by pressing the buttons at the bottom of the screen, or you can mix and match the sounds as I showed you before just by turning these on in various time frames. So once again, this is simply nothing but cool. The entire collection of live instruments or live sounds in GarageBand is phenomenal. We're only looking at the electronic dance music version currently. Remember, there were like 5 or 10 different styles that you can explore in the same manner. There's also an effects button up here that I haven't shown, and this is pretty cool as well. Let me just turn on one of these and just let it keep playing. I can filter this. I can break it up, pulse it, you might say, and play it backwards. Can scratch it on a record. Scratch it here. I can wind it down there. Got a couple of different winds. Here's kind of a broken pattern. Over here is the repeater. Faster. And I can record all of these things into a song in real time. If I just hit the record button, it immediately begins recording these live loops, which are beyond cool. I'm going to go back up to my instrument setting here, and once again, here is my collection of live loops that are available to me. I've got EDM, hip-hop, dubstep, R&B, house, chill, rock, electro-funk, beatmaster, and 2 Chinese traditions, traditional Chinese, and then Chinese modern as well. So what a phenomenal collection of materials on GarageBand for the iPad. I hope this has been informational and useful, and highly recommend this particular program. I think that currently it may be selling in the iPad store for $5, $4.95 or something like that. This is the best $4.95 that you could possibly ever spend. I have been working a long time, so in my iCloud drive, I actually have a number of GarageBand songs for iOS, and you'll see literally hundreds of songs that have been saved in here, and some of them are just quite unique and wonderful. I really love playing some of these. This one, for example, is generated with a lot of the auto patterns that are created in GarageBand. It sounds kind of familiar to people. People might associate this with other style songs that they've heard in the past. Once again, these are nothing but autoplay chord progressions using the GarageBand instruments. There's a melody coming in just a second here, and that melody is an original melody that I played. Add the congas and the melodic instrument. So the bass comes in just a few measures here. So as we build a song, we increase our strength by adding instruments, all in chord progressions, switching ahead, bass, increase drum, and jumping over to the very end. And sometimes just a very simple ending is all you need. GarageBand songs very frequently repeat by default. So what can you do with GarageBand? You can do production on the highest level. These songs that sound like this could very easily have vocal tracks added to them so that they do sound phenomenal. Let me see if I can find a vocal track of somebody singing something a little bit exciting here. Oh yeah, here's one that's pretty simple and wonderfully pleasant and very enjoyable. Okay, that song could not be open for some reason, so maybe it needs to be downloaded to my laptop. Let's see if I can find another one. If this doesn't work, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Okay, here's a song that was recorded by students of mine, Katie and Derek Bauman, and this is Derek and Katie singing an original song of theirs recorded in GarageBand. These are live instruments that are recorded. These are not using loops. This is just actually their recording.
I feel great. Don't you hear what I say? I say I feel great. Don't you hear what I say?
Okay, so basically you can see the number of styles and directions that you can go in GarageBand are pretty much unlimited. So thank you for jumping in on my tour of GarageBand for the iPad today. I know this is kind of a lengthy tour, but hopefully this is very informative. All right, thank you. Goodbye.